meditator. I've practiced meditation for quite some time. But one of the things that drew me to meditation is the brain, is what I came to know about the brain. And meditators often talk about what they call the monkey mind. And the monkey mind's a good name for it. That's that thinking brain that never shuts up, right? You notice that? You got this mental chatter that's going on all the time. And 2,500 years ago, the Buddha was talking about that. And meditation is a way of observing that and settling that and being aware of the arising of emotions. And there was this very sophisticated kind of brain scanning that was going on in early meditative practices way before the technology of brain scanning that we use today. Four big ideas that, and not all of these are technical terms, the one up there that I'm using, negativity, is not. But these are the categories that I just kind of wanted to focus on briefly. And really, the first three will be the ones I'll focus on for the next few moments. Negativity, the first one, just to kind of read through this, our brains are hardwired for negative thinking. I think that's a really significant thing to realize. That helps to explain a lot of human behavior, a lot of civilization and its discontents, to quote Freud. And right there, it's in that observation. And we can blame, I guess, millions of years of evolution for that. But fortunately, because of the neocortex, has quite a plasticity quality to it. This quality of neuroplasticity is the brain is able to rewire itself through the creation of new neural pathways. And we'll briefly look at that, but I mean, just a personal note, when my mother had a stroke about 12 years ago, I was able to observe very at close hand that quality of plasticity, where she completely lost language and then reacquired language. And just because of the neural process rewiring of the brain, it's extraordinarily resourceful in doing that, and in a sense kind of healing itself and reprogramming itself. The thing that's really exciting about this is that we have the ability to harness the power of that. And through conditioning and through habitual routines, we can change negative patterns into positive patterns. We can rewire those millions-year-old pathways into more productive. And this is, I like very much what I've heard in the last couple of presentations, because I similarly have students who come from very diverse backgrounds, and there is a lot of negative baggy history that comes into the classroom. And my approach, as I talked about last year here at this conference, was to focus on empathy in teaching, dialogic leadership, and empathetic approaches and so on. And that's one of the ways of really cultivating that very quality and meeting that head on. Neurotransmitters are the coin of the realm in brain science. And that's really, I wish we had more time to talk about that, but they are chemicals that communicate our feelings and emotions through the brain's neural pathways. And as we activate those, that's how the brain rewires itself, basically, through thought, through action, through feeling. Obviously, I hope you see already some leadership connections there, because leaders who know this are able to then lead a certain way that doesn't reinforce the negativity, but actually works against that, the positive feedback and so on. Modularity, it really is just a way of kind of putting the period on the previous models of the brain, that this growing complexity, that the neocortex has multiple neural pathways with the limbic system. You think and it makes you feel bad. Wow, how is that? How does a thought make you feel bad? Because the neocortex and the limbic system are communicating. And so, but modularity is much more complex than that. Functions are shared across multiple regions. Negativity. The brain has been described as flypaper for negative thoughts. Flypaper for negativity. What a bummer, isn't it? Right? That we are born with this amazing brain that just grabs negative stuff and just hangs on to it, right?
Yeah, it's almost scary.
It is scary. It is. You know what? But it's also kind of liberating to realize that. That, gee, I'm not just a negative person. It's kind of, that's how my brain is set up, and there's a good reason for that, of why the brain is set up that way. If I can get this covered, there we go. The brain does what it does very well. I think we need to give it credit. It works for one thing and one thing only, for your survival and the survival of your genes. Again, that's a real sober analysis there, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it's not there to make me feel good. It's not. It's really not concerned in about my happiness, so to speak, or my sense of well-being, unless that's crucial to my survival, right? I mean, everything's subordinated to that. And so we approach this as 21st century people, and we just kind of, we're thinking, we're just in another realm in terms of what our priorities are. Why can't I be happy? You know, why am I not happy? Why am I so negative? Your brain is just really doing well what it was programmed for a very long time to do, to keep you on your toes, for you to be anxious, for you to be fearful, for you to be looking around the corner and make sure you're not going to be grabbed by a predator. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly why probably the brain has, I keep pointing to the screen when I do this, and I need to be pointing to the remote right down here, right? Finally figured out, you know, why it's a little sluggish. The idea that evolutionary neuropsychologists would argue that, you know, anxiety and fear would give a kind of evolutionary advantage for the reasons I just suggested a moment ago. And we still have that stuff. That's kind of the downside of it, right? I mean, we don't get rid of that. We didn't acquire it easily, and we're not going to get rid of it really quickly. And I like how E.O. Wilson put it. He said that we have, if I can get this right, he said we have Neolithic brains, we have medieval institutions, and we have 21st century technology. It's a really bad combination when you think about it, right? And so, you know, the brain is not quite caught up to the, you know, the level of our lives and the levels of our technology. And, you know, you think about that, most of us, we're not going day to day wondering where am I going to get, you know, food and where am I going to sleep, and we're not dealing with those kinds of things. And, you know, most of us live in relative comfort, and we have relative plenty, right? We should be pretty content with that. And why is it that there is all the kinds of stress that Alan was talking about, and all of the discontent and so on? And this is one explanation for that. I mean, how credible that is, I mean, one would have to hash that out, I suppose. But it's a fairly compelling argument, I think, that can be made for the situation we find ourselves in. There we go, pointing at the screen again. All right, let's talk about neuroplasticity. I really should have put the neuro on the front of that to make that more specific, as that is the technical term that is used. Fortunately, despite all of that, you know, eons long developing negativity, we can do something about it. And that again is why the mindfulness topic is so interesting to me. The brain can rewire itself. There's a wonderful saying in cognitive science that neurons that fire together wire together. And it's a good way basically of saying that when you cultivate good habits over and over again, this is a good reminder for us as teachers and our students. The brain takes notice of that and is actually rewiring itself. And it becomes then easier to be positive, to do those things that are productive and beneficial and conducive to your well-being. There's another expression I like here, and that is our routines make roots in our brains. And they're just kind of setting down those ruts, as it were, as we keep doing that routine, that habitual conditioning over and over again. Let me just give you a little schema here for how that works. Mental activity. The mental activity can be a thought, a feeling, or an action. So it can be, you know, it can be physiological, you know, because there is a mental brain component to that. In fact, you're familiar with this, I'm sure, that brain scans show that if you think about a particular action, the same part of the brain is activated as if you physically do it. And that's why athletic visualization is so effective, probably, right? Because it's the same part of the brain that's being activated. And so physical, mental as thinking, cognition, emotional feelings and so on, all of those we're going to classify under mental activities. Those mental activities are defined by chemicals passing across neural synapses and making connections. And that's what's happening. So the next step, creation of new neural structures, is those chemicals like dopamine and so on are being released. Repetition, the repetition is critical here of the mental activity. And what that leads to then is the strengthening of those neural connections. You're actually kind of growing a new habit and in a very real neurological way. Speaking of neurotransmitters, let me give you a kind of a more formal definition of those, since as I called them a moment ago, they are the gold, the coin rather, of the realm in brain science. A neurotransmitter is a chemical substance that is released at the end of a nerve fiber by the arrival of a nerve impulse and by diffusing across the synapse or junction, causes the transfer of the impulse to another nerve fiber, a muscle fiber, or some other structure. That's a fairly technical definition, obviously, but that's when we're talking about these things like dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins. That's what we mean. These are sometimes lumped together as the 4 happy chemicals. And again, as I said a few moments ago, I want to give you a caveat about that, because this stuff, it filters in, like the left brain, right brain, filters into the popular language and culture and whatnot, and it becomes simplified, and there's tremendous complexity and very exciting research is being done. I'm not sure of a specific leadership connection here, but I think it's too interesting to pass up. So let me just say something very interesting about dopamine and serotonin in terms of how they function in the brain and what we're learning about something like addiction. Addiction really involves, certainly a big part of addiction, I would say, I don't want to be overly dogmatic, involves these first 2 neurotransmitters in a very fundamental way. And let's say somebody has a shopping addiction or a gambling addiction. There might be the planning to go to Tyson's Corner, or an addiction for gambling to go to Atlantic City or something. And in the anticipation of that, dopamine is being pumped into the system like crazy, because dopamine is the anticipation. The pleasure of dopamine is the anticipation. It's not the reward, but it's the anticipation of the reward. You would think then that it would just be like a huge shot of dopamine when you actually get it. You get there and you're starting to shop, or you're pulling those slot machines or whatever. That's where serotonin kicks in. Serotonin is the reward part of it. Now here's the interesting thing that kind of makes a lot of sense about addiction when you think about it. We all know that when you get something over and over and over again, there's a diminishing return to the value, the reward value of that, right? And we've all experienced that. And so the actual serotonin that is going to be released into your system will reduce over time. But you know what doesn't get reduced? The dopamine. And so what's theorized is that people become addicted to dopamine. They become addicted to the anticipation, not the reward. And that's a really fascinating kind of discovery. And that's the kind of stuff that is being routinely explored and researched, and with tremendous application possibilities. Let's move on though. Leadership connections. I'm not going to say a lot about this, though I promised it. Transformational leadership, familiar I'm sure to you. Let me just give you kind of a quick quote from the book of 2005, and just see if you can kind of see the connections, the positive, the empathetic, there's a lot of neurotransmission going on here in this passage, basically is what I see when I read it. And it wasn't, I don't believe this was set out at all to kind of track along neuroscience, and yet it really does in many ways. Transformational leaders are those who stimulate and inspire followers to both achieve extraordinary outcomes and in the process develop their own leadership capacity, the emphasis on creativity, the emphasis upon individual achievement, the positive feedback that's implicit in that's going to be releasing all kinds of oxytocin and so on into the, all of these things it's there in that model. Transformational leaders help followers grow and develop into leaders by responding to individual followers' needs, by empowering them, aligning the objectives and goals of the individual followers, the leader of the group, and the larger organization, as opposed to cracking a whip over them and telling them they're just a bunch of lazy good-for-nothings, right? Which only reinforces that already dominant negative neural wiring of the brain. Some off-the-shelf takeaways here. I have 3 that I'm going to end with. The first one is, again, we know this. We know that positive feedback works, but we know the science behind it now. I think that's what's really exciting about this. And knowing the science really gives us no excuse. I mean, and even in preparing this particular presentation, I was thinking about this as one who teaches writing, and I was thinking about the feedback that I give. Invariably, and I know this, and yet the feedback that I give is always an explanation and a justification for why I'm taking points off their paper. And I thought, what a strange thing that we justify points that we take off. We don't justify points that they earn. You know what I'm saying? It's just, it's an orientation that we have in grading. that just comes at this from the wrong way. And I don't know, I don't have a quick answer, a replacement for that, but I wish